The pharmaceutical industry earns over $1.4 trillion annually.
It is the most profitable industry in human history, generating margins that dwarf oil, technology, and finance. It operates under a regulatory system it has spent billions of dollars shaping. And in the past 30 years, it has been responsible for a series of public health disasters, each driven by the same combination of suppressed data, corrupted science, and the systematic prioritization of profit over human life. What follows is not an argument against medicine. It is the documented record of what happens when medicine becomes an industry.
The Food and Drug Administration is funded in part by the pharmaceutical industry.
The Prescription Drug User Fee Act, passed in 1992, allows pharmaceutical companies to pay fees to the FDA to speed up the drug approval process.
The FDA now receives over half of its drug review budget from industry fees. The people responsible for approving drugs are partially funded by the companies seeking approval. This arrangement, known as regulatory capture, does not guarantee corruption. But it creates structural incentives that have produced documented, deadly consequences. In 1999, Merck launched Vioxx, a painkiller for arthritis. Sales reached $2.5 billion annually within a few years.
In 2004, Merck withdrew it from the market after their own clinical trial data showed it doubled the risk of heart attack and stroke. But Merck had known about the cardiovascular risks years earlier and had not disclosed them to the FDA or the public. An FDA scientist estimated that Vioxx had caused between 88,000 and 139,000 heart attacks during its time on the market. Between 55,000 and 60,000 of those patients died.
The Vioxx case was not unique.
A systematic review of pharmaceutical industry-funded clinical trials found they were significantly more likely to produce favorable results than independently funded trials studying the same drugs.
The mechanism is not primarily fabrication. It is selection. Companies fund multiple trials and publish the positive results. The negative trials are filed away.
This practice, called publication bias, systematically distorts the scientific literature on which doctors base prescribing decisions.
Doctors prescribe based on published science.
The published science is curated by the companies selling the drugs.
In 1996, Purdue Pharma launched OxyContin.
Its marketing campaign was built on a single claim, that OxyContin's extended-release formula made it less addictive than other opioids. The company sent sales representatives to doctors with this message and provided lavish gifts, speaking fees, and funded continuing medical education programs that promoted OxyContin. The claim that OxyContin was less addictive was, at best, unsupported by evidence.
At worst, Purdue knew it was false from the beginning.
The opioid crisis that followed has killed over 500,000 Americans. The geography of the opioid crisis is not random. It tracked almost exactly with where Purdue's sales representatives were most active and where doctors prescribed OxyContin at the highest rates. Rural communities, post-industrial towns, places where chronic pain was common and healthcare options were limited.
Purdue targeted these communities with precision.
They tracked prescriptions by doctor. They rewarded their sales force based on prescriptions written. They built a system that turned the human condition of pain into a pipeline for addiction.
And they did it knowingly. Purdue Pharma eventually pleaded guilty to federal criminal charges.
The Sackler family, who had extracted over $10 billion from the company, negotiated a settlement that shielded most of their personal wealth from civil claims by opioid victims. The settlement was initially blocked by a federal judge who ruled it was inappropriate to grant immunity to family members who had not themselves filed for bankruptcy.
The legal proceedings continue. The Sackler family remains extraordinarily wealthy. 500,000 Americans are dead.
In 2004, GlaxoSmithKline pleaded guilty to criminal charges related to promoting the antidepressant Paxil for use in children, a use it had never been approved for. Internal documents showed the company had known clinical trials showed Paxil was ineffective in adolescents and showed an increased risk of suicidal thinking. The company had suppressed this data for years while actively marketing the drug for use in the very population at highest risk. They paid a fine of $3 billion, the largest healthcare fraud settlement in U.S. history at that time.
No senior executive went to prison.
The United States pays dramatically more for prescription drugs than every other developed nation. Insulin, a drug discovered in 1921 and whose inventors sold the patent for $1 to ensure universal access, now costs on average 10 times more in the United States than in Canada.
Americans with diabetes have died rationing their insulin because they could not afford it. The pharmaceutical industry spends more on lobbying Congress than any other industry. It has successfully blocked every serious attempt at drug price negotiation for decades. The corruption of pharmaceutical science is not limited to hiding adverse data. It extends to the design of clinical trials, the selection of endpoints, the framing of results, and the publication strategy. A study in the New England Journal of Medicine found that nearly every major clinical guideline in cardiology is written by physicians who receive significant funding from the pharmaceutical industry. The guidelines that determine how millions of patients are treated are written by people who profit from those treatment decisions. This is disclosed. But disclosure does not eliminate the conflict. It normalizes it. None of this means that pharmaceutical drugs do not work or that medicine is entirely corrupt. Most drugs do what their manufacturers claim. Most doctors prescribe in their patients' best interests. But the system has produced documented, catastrophic failures when financial incentives have overridden scientific integrity. Knowing how the system works makes you a better informed patient. Ask about evidence. Ask about funding sources. Ask about alternatives. Ask whether the drug treats a condition or manages a symptom indefinitely. The information exists. You just have to demand it. This is the Redacted.